Homicide detective. I've interviewed thousands of people, from serial killers to ministers. Welcome to the interview room. Welcome to the interview room, everybody, on this wonderful Sunday evening. What an amazing panel of guests we have tonight for you. If you're brand new with us here at the interview room, we only ask that you hit that subscribe button and that you send this program around the world. For that, we would be extremely grateful. First, a big thank you to our mods, Miss Sophia, Teresa M., Maui Girl, Mimi J2. These women keep this channel family friendly and healthy. For that, we are always grateful. And of course, our subscribers, and of course, all of our Patreon members and everybody else that supports our channel. Tonight, we have to welcome back our good friends, Dr. Ann Burgess, Dr. Gary Brucato, and from Iceland, Dr. Jonasson, aka Dr. Hawk, because I will hack his last name up, and I, would need to go and repent many times if I tried that this evening. So I'm not even going to try. But as you know, Dr. Ann Burgess, she is a renowned pioneer in the assessment and treatment of victims of trauma and abuse. She's one of the original mind hunters, and she's the author of Killer by Design, Murderers, Mind Hunters, and My Quest to Decipher the Criminal Mind. And of course, as always, we have links to her book and to her books, and Gary's books, and Dr. Hawk's books. She's an author of 11 books as well. And among her many awards and accolades, in 2016, she was named a living legend by the American Academy of Nursing. And let me tell you, if you've ever watched the show Mindhunter, where it was a Netflix series, and you see the character Wendy, that's Ann. Okay? Now, in the upper right-hand corner, of course, you know Dr. Gary Brucato. He's a PhD and a visiting scholar at Boston College, where he collaborates with Dr. Ann Burgess and Dr. Victor Petraea, who you've seen on this program, in forensic research. They have examined crimes such as murders, including serial killing, sex offenses, mutilations, dismemberments, and the insanity defense. I could have thought of having nobody better than this panel to talk about this guy in Long Island than the group of professionals you see above. Make sure you all participate in the conversation tonight. Gary is serving currently as a consultant on a grant-funded project by Burgess, Dr. Burgess, and Dr. Preteka, sorry, he knows, analyzing murders involving asphyxiation by strangulation and other means. This is right up their alley. He studies, among other things, how violent thoughts and actions emerge into a psychotic and non-psychotic persons. And then, of course, our new guest tonight, a dear friend of Ann's and colleague of Dr. Gary and Dr. Burgess, Dr. Jonasson, a.k.a. Hawk. He's a professor of leadership, management, organization, the Behavioral School of Theology. He holds a theological degree from the University of Iceland and a PhD degree in psychiatry and religion in the Union Theological Seminary in New York City. Dr. Hawk has clinical certifications in pastoral counseling from the Healthcare Chaplaincy Inc. and is a psychoanalyst for the Harlem Family Institute in New York. He's the co-author and founder of the Nordic Consulting Group and a research affiliate at the Cooper Union for the Advancement of the Sciences and the Arts. He is an amazing human mind, as you can see, and he's not only the author of 5 books that he co-authored, but he's a total author of over 11 books on management and leadership, as well as thought. So with that, and that's, by the way, guys, that's their short bios. That's their short bios. Okay. So we have a great opportunity to get into the mind of this gentleman in New York City. First off, I've got to say, unbelievable police work, unreal police work by Suffolk County PD and FBI, NYPD, all the teams that came together to start connecting some of these dots. So with that, opening statements, we always start in the upper left-hand corner with Dr. Burgess, because my mother would never forgive me, as I always tell. Hi, Ann. Good evening. It's great to see you. You're muted. You just hit your mute, but you're muted. That's okay.
Yeah. Yes, I'm delighted to be here and anxious to get talking about this Long Island serial killer. It's quite a case.
Awesome. Dr. Gary, opening statement, first thought process. You're muted as well. We're 2 for 2.
There we go. No, I said I think my first thought process is that whatever the idiosyncrasies are that we're going to discuss in terms of this case, really the wider conversation we'd be having is about men who commit serial sexual homicide. This is really a textbook case of a person who commits that. And I think in order to get into the psychology of it, people like you have here that study these cases, I think we can make a lot of comparisons with previous cases and talk about the fantasy life and that in many ways he would fit the classic profile of what we would expect to see in somebody doing this. And as a consequence, I think we could make some pretty good predictions about what we're probably going to discover about him based on there being very little new under the sun when it comes to people who commit these particular offenses.
Great. And Dr. Hawk, I wore my palm tree shirt here tonight, knowing you're in Iceland, just in case I could bring some warmth to your part of the country. But that said, what are your initial thoughts going into this?
Well, I'm talking to you. It's midnight in Iceland, actually, and you can see it's bright as daylight. You see, there's no night here in this time of the year. So, well, I'm just honored to be with you. I met with Ann Burgess, and we are good friends. And I think I might have some interesting insights into this case. The thing is, what brought me into it, I wrote to Anne yesterday, and I told her, do you realize that this guy was married to an Icelandic woman, and or like of Icelandic descent, and that's how it that's why she brought me to your show. So let's see what happens. And I have some insights beyond that too.
Wonderful. Okay, so let me just tee up a quick couple of slides here, so kind of level set for everybody. And I noticed I'm going to move you up into that position, Doc, so that I'm down here. Okay, so the Long Island killer right now is alleged to have taken the life of 3 women, and his name is Rex Heuermann, an architect out of Manhattan, a long-time resident of the Long Island area, and like Dr. Hawk said, married to an Icelandic, how do you pronounce, is it Icelander?
Well, she was not Icelander. She was of Icelandic descent. Her name is Ása Guðni. She's of Icelandic descent. I'm not sure how much of an Icelander she is anymore. I mean, she's probably second generation Icelander. I mean, she went to college in the States. She seems to be educated in the States. I'm not sure if she was even born in Iceland, but
Okay.
So, yeah, so she could be second generation. Yeah, I don't
So
know.
open question to the panel, and what strikes you, if anything, first impressions when you read they got a guy and he's in custody? And we'll start with you, Dr. Burgess.
Sure. Well, what struck me is I'm always interested in some of the peripheral kinds of things at how they, well, basically how they caught him. I always am interested in that. And that was really excellent police work that they did. This is a case that's been going on for 13 years. That's a long time. So there also was struck by the fact that it seems that they don't have any other crimes on him after 2011 or 12 for about 10 years. And that's always curious that there is this break, if you will. But also, one of the things we look at that we'll get into if you're trying to diagnose them is the high social competence or low social competence, because that seems to be making a difference in some of these cases. He certainly is of high social competence. He was married, evidently had children, worked, had things that would make him seem to all extents that he was not someone that was out killing people. So that's what struck me initially. And then as we get into it, I think he has a very unusual aspect of recontacting victim families. And that means something to him. So I hope we can talk a little bit about that.
Okay, Dr. Brucato, thoughts, initial?
Well, what jumped out at me right away was that he was, the charges for 3 victims. And this man is 59 years old. And based on the average age at which people who commit serial sexual homicide begin, when they begin, when they tend to cool off and stop, they're, through a fair trial and is found guilty, what we will likely discover is that there are plenty more. It is very difficult for me to believe that this person has 3 victims, and this long period of no offenses is also strange. There are some anomalies like the BTK killer, although one could speculate about whether he really paused at all. But I think the idea is we have to take a look at other offenders and when they tend to kind of heat up and do this. And if he's like anyone else that commits serial sexual homicide, the average age of beginning to do so is about 26, 27 years old, around there. I spoke today to Dr. Terry Leary, who runs the serial killer database at Radford and Florida Gulf Coast universities. And that's the largest database, to my knowledge, of serial killing in the world. Several thousand offenders are in there. He confirmed that in his data set, it's also approximately then, around 26, 27. So that would be very strange. I mean, if it turned out that this guy, like, let's say in his 40s or in his 30s, was just, killing for a little while and then vanished. So I think we're probably going to see a piling up of victims. I'd be curious to hear what Ann and Dr. Hawk think about that, but it would be very puzzling for somebody with that psychology to be gratified with these three killers that have these killings that have features that are very similar and suggest the person perfecting a pattern and then sort of stop like that. What do you think, Ann and Dr. Hawk, about that?
Well, I'll let Dr. Hawk start. You want to start on that? Yeah, go ahead.
I mean,
He's got to give his opening too. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, apparently the murders are since 2020.
Mhm.
That's kind of so it's kind of interesting. Why did it happen then? Why did he start then? And why did he stop then? Because they're all in 2020. And I have actually a list of 4 people 4 women. They're all women, no? Megan, Amber, Melissa, and Shannon. And they're all young. They're all in their 30s. So I don't know much about that particular case, but what I find interesting is why and under what circumstances, because we are all a little crazed, but how can it happen to some people that the imaginative kind of the buffer that you have between your fantasy life and reality collapses, and you act it out, and you just do it, and it becomes a violent crime like that. I've seen that in kind of in the making in some clients, and I also talk to people that have been kind of have acted out on it. But I think that's kind of a very fascinating thing when the very primitive fantasy gets acted out in this way. And at that age, I mean, the guy is not. Why so late?
Yeah, well, and right now he's been charged with 6 counts, 3 first-degree murders and 3 second-degree murders, and typically on first-degree and second-degree on Melissa, Megan, and Amber. So they've got him on 6 counts of homicide, and typically, the DAs do that just in case, a jury doesn't find him guilty on first, they'll pick him up on the second. So, to your point, Dr. Hawk and Dr. Burgess and Gary, let's get into some of the victimology aspects of these crimes, as well as the location. Like you said, Gary, things are kind of, compacted out there. I mean, earlier we had talked on other times, but, this is a very specific location. It has all the earmarks of, comfortable environment, comfortable, et cetera. We now learn he is a lifelong resident of that area. What are your initial thoughts on the victimology here coming into this with these first 3 victims? Let's start with them.
Well, he certainly targets vulnerable women. These are women who are escorts, whatever you wish to say. They are responding to some type of invitation to meet, which is for anyone that's into this kind of thing, it's so dangerous. But they are all I think they're in their early 20s, and they have, he gets them, as I understand it. I know one of the later ones was on Craigslist. Others, I think he'd gotten them from lists of somewhere. And
Tinder. He had a Tinder account and all of that stuff. Yep.
Right. So that's his method of accessing them, being very vulnerable, because they're going to meet people they don't have no idea, and that's for something sexual. So that I think is important in terms of how he targets his victims. I think the other thing is that aside from what he does to them, that they're all buried in a very close proximity to each other, which is rather interesting, and it means something to him. I know that when they started looking for him way back in 2010 or whatever, that they would look in a certain circumscribed area because of the location. And he lived, I think, just across the causeway, from what I've read, if it is him. So where he takes them for the sexes, I'm not sure. Sometimes I think he took them back to their house, and sometimes I'm not clear where he took them. Maybe Gary knows that. Do you know the location for the sexual assault, Gary?
Well, this is something being speculated about, but what it appears is that he may have waited until his wife was away, with the kids, and then would hire a sex worker using a kind of burner phone, lure them home, and then engage in whatever he was going to do, which apparently involved some degree of sadism. And it also appears that his method of killing was predominantly strangulation, which falls right into our area of research. And we don't know if it was manual or with ligature. And then there was this almost signature-like way that he would, sort of put them in burlap, which had camouflage on it. What I've been told is that they were like the bags that would be used for bagging ducks from hunting, like that kind of burlap with a camouflage pattern on it, and then sort of put them, dump them there, which is what had made people speculate for some time that this guy probably had some kind of pickup truck or large vehicle where he was transporting the body. I think one of the things we have to think about when we think about the victim selection and the fact that they were so close is that he probably had a very limited amount of time, because he had to do it when the wife wasn't around briefly, and then that would sort of play into this. What jumps out to me right away is that they were sex workers. They were people that I think would be considered attractive, that would have been much younger than him, and they were people that I think I imagine had the quality of looking like the kind of people that probably once upon a time rejected this guy. It's already emerging that in high school he was bullied, that women didn't think much of him, that he was kind of strange and awkward and off-putting and did things that were kind of creepy. So the other thing that jumps out is that he was finding them electronically. So there's a little bit of a kind of intellectual distance from meeting someone on the street or trolling somebody that you're seeing out in real life. It was just a kind of a mechanical thing where you look like it's almost like shopping on Amazon for a victim, where he's going through and then finds the kind of product, so to speak, that he is drawn to, and then lures the person and does what he does. But I think that the key to this guy, as we're going to see, I think we're all going to agree, is that whatever's going on with his personality, he's quite sadistic. And this quality of, like, for example, with Beth Eleni's family, calling them up and taunting them, which was reported in a newspaper, I think about 2011, that had happened to the family, says something about what was being played out with these killings. And I think, this is not just a guy committing sexual assault. This guy relishes the cruelty, the sadism. And I think that kind of makes him stand out a little bit, in that he can be cruel even in non-sexual ways, and enjoy that. And then, of course, there's the humiliation of the way these women were just sort of bagged and dumped like that. There was no dismemberment, nothing like that. They were whole, and then put into this burlap thing and sort of dropped. And so I think there's a terrible sadness when you think about the kind of interchangeableness of these women in this guy's mind. And then you pair that, and you and I talk about this all the time, how strange it is that he had such a seemingly loving relationship with his wife and with somebody. I mean, he might have been considered weird, but this is one of these serial offenders of the split, kind of compartmentalized quality, where you say that he lives a double life, that kind of type of guy, which I think gets really interesting psychologically too.
That's
Yes.
an important piece of this, as you've raised. And so let's talk a little bit about that. Dr. Hawk, tell us a little bit from your perspective about the personality of, potentially his wife, who's from Iceland. Kind of bring us up to speed on that.
Well, I don't know much about it, but her name is Ása Guðný, and the spelling of the name is very Icelandic. She uses the accent on the A and in the Y in the end. So I tried to do a little search if I could find her Facebook profile and things like that. I can also, but I couldn't find it. Like I didn't have much time to prepare, but I tried my best. There is a picture online where she is kind of in the front, and he is standing behind her in some kind of a party. And there was some speculation early on that if she was maybe in on it with him, but apparently she was, when he committed the crime, she was away with her kids. The little I know of those. So she has been asked to be kept out of it, and from my perspective. So if I take, take a stand here, I think it's for her, it's a tragedy. I'm not. You never know, but let's hope that it's a tragedy. I mean, it's a tragedy for her in the sense that she's not part of it.
Yeah, let's hope that for sure. And
that he's an innocent victim of that whole thing.
It sounds like, but Huck, don't you think that she was a control over him? That he wouldn't, if that's true, that he didn't commit these crimes when she was present in the home. That would show some kind of controls that she had on him, which would be positive. It's when she leaves and what that means that he then acts out. I think that's rather interesting because we've certainly seen other cases where that didn't happen.
That's right. I mean, it could be, and it could not be. I think it's a very delicate thing to assume. I mean, it's apparently there's something very strange going on in that relationship, in that marriage. They married in she's one month older, so I mean, we have had cases when the woman is kind of much older, much more dominating. We have had cases when there is a kind of obviously a power, the power dynamics with regards to age is there, but she's kind of same age. They have one daughter together. They married 1996. And he became the stepfather of her son from a previous marriage. That's what we know about. In the same years, he gave birth to their daughter. And then there's some comment I found on the internet. She was kind of keen on comics like conventions. Like, I don't know what it means. I think it's probably like comic, cartoons.
Yeah, in the States, they have Comic-Cons where they dress up, and sometimes they're anime and a variety of other things. Go ahead.
So she said the Baltimore Comic Convention. I do love that convention, she says. I also love hanging down at the pier. It was great. So there might be some kind of a fantasy life that might have to do with power, dominance, God knows what. Or maybe not. I don't know. It's just speculation. Then on May 24, 2020, she wrote on Twitter, "Well, this volcano is determined to wreak havoc in Iceland, and tourists want to come out and tour that island and watch." That was when there was an eruption here, and I think that's in my world, it's a little bit like the volcanic eruptions kind of symbolize a little bit when people are kind of the acting out of when people do things that are unexpected, and they're trying to keep it down, hold back, and then it erupts. And so maybe something in 2010, something happened between the two of them, and or in him, or that made him act out. Or maybe we still need to. Maybe there's still much more there. Maybe it had been going on for years before, but something is going on in 2010. That is, yeah.
And Doc, just so we can maybe those dynamics, and we can talk about that stuff. To your point, it looks like he may have gone back as early as 2007. To where one of the first remains was found of somebody. And the initial information right now, the investigation has shown that originally every time she would leave and go back and visit family in Iceland, they seem to want to do a correlation here to that behavior being acted out. So with that, Doc, Gary and Anne and Dr. Hawk, let's talk about those dynamics in relationship to the ability to compartmentalize these types of behaviors and how they would maybe manifest in what, from the face value at this point, a normal relationship. What do you think?
Well, is it? I don't know if anybody else wants to go first on this. Is it okay if I jump in there?
Sure,
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I think that when you're dealing with men who commit serial sexual homicide, most of them are going to have a personality structure that is at least partially psychopathic. And some of them will run the gamut into extreme sadism. It's estimated that about 50% of psychopaths are also schizoid, meaning kind of mechanical, detached, choosing solitary activities, things like that. Now, what's interesting about these people, the ones that are the kind of higher functioning, is that they tend to engage in this kind of compartmentalization where they can have this normal life by day and then have this other life that's kind of coming out by night. And there is a longing, as I always say, to bridge the two. It's almost like a wish that somebody would discover their artwork or their photographs or something, and the curtain will be pulled away and you'll see this grand kind of enormous self that they've constructed. I've been very interested in this case that this man seemed to draw a kind of grandiose sense of himself from his technical ability. He is an architect. He's a furniture maker. He is very good with tools. He had some background in like aerospace stuff. And I think there's something very telling about this use of the internet to experience power over people, to monitor them, the use of the phone to manipulate them. That it's almost as if you get the sense of a person who uses technology to hide behind and experience a grandiose sense of self. And behind that curtain, he's gigantic, he's enormous, he's whatever. And what's interesting is that when you look at these technical serial killers, a lot of times they engage in torture because it's intellectually stimulating. They like the use of the objects that are used in torture. They like the visual quality of it, but they also like reducing the person to a science where they say, what happens to this part of your body when I do this to it? So that there's a curiosity quality about this person. And I think what you would have seen is that even at baseline, when he was interpersonally, kind of fooling everyone, if he is the guilty guy, I think what would have happened is every once in a while, if you made him feel out of control, the curtain would have lifted for just a second, and you would have seen that he was a nasty, sadistic, controlling kind of a guy that would bark at you or condescend to you. This is beautifully illustrated in that video that emerged of him on YouTube, where he's talking about the symbolic, the hammer that he uses in his furniture building. And he makes a joke that if people aren't in compliance, he could just whip out that tool and kind of force them into compliance. And there, in just that little glimpse, you see what would probably happen if this guy felt out of control. Now, I mention this because it matches what Anne is talking about, that you get the sense that when there was distance, when his wife, who probably saw him for what he really was, wasn't around, in that absence and in that kind of space, he would feel kind of out of control and could be whatever he wanted to be in this fantasy world. And you get the sense that he probably even told her to go away once in a while because he was feeling out of control and had the need. And we see that with people, for example, serial killers that have that double life. I mean, you see certainly Israel Keys is an excellent example of that, or even John Wayne Gacy was an excellent example of that, right? And so you start to see this whole thing right under the person's nose. BTK, another example, and I think the key to the whole thing is that when he was with these women, he could be the figure of domination, control, and manipulation that he had always wanted to be, that he could never be otherwise. But I think that technical quality, it gives me the chills because I could just imagine what a person like that was doing with a human being when they were bound and in his possession, because those offenders are intensely visual and they can be very experimental and very sadistic. And wouldn't you say we see quite a lot of that with
Yes,
these kind
yes,
of
we
offenders?
do. I was going to just add a bit to his work. tells us a little bit about himself, and that he's so detailed and he measures things, and if he's an architect and everything has to be just perfect and online and so forth. And even that example where if anything's out of line, he just grab his hammer and put it back, and that might be just the way he thinks. So, but I do think that the wife served an important role in controlling him to some degree. That would be very interesting to know why she left, when she would take, quote, the kids and go somewhere. That maybe that, as I think Hawk was saying, is it could have been have some domestic violence or some domestic dispute or something in the relationship, and she had to get away, and that's when he would act out rather than act out on her. You'd want to go back. What year was the daughter born? That might be a target kind of a situation. There's usually always something. I would agree with Hawk that there's usually something that triggers and sets them off, or he starts losing control over. And that would be important to look at, whether it was 2007 or 2010 or whatever. And the other thing is why he gets caught is what was going on there. There was some conversation. I think the burner phones were, he was contacting some of the other families. I think I read that in the paper, which would, that's the other point that we wanted to make. What was that all about? What the dynamics of that? Well, there are a couple of cases that we know of where that has happened. I think goes way back to the Meyerhofer case, where they actually caught the Meyerhoff for the abduction and murder of a little 7-year-old and a 20-year-old. But at any rate, they caught him by luring him into conversation. And then, of course, Larry Jean Bell is another good case. So there's some very interesting things. The other thing is, when does he do this? Does he do this at night when it's very dark and he can get away with hiding them and so forth? Need to know more about the how he buries them or not. That they all seem kind of clustered. It's almost like he's got a little ritualistic place that he takes them.
Yeah, and at this point, the investigation is showing over time that he has lined them up in various stages, as well as spread them out. But that one, geographic area, he's very obviously. It appears he's very comfortable because they have that string of victims and remains found there, and I don't think they've connected them all yet. Doctor, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say one more thing. Because he's an architect and he's used to plans and so forth, I wonder if they're going to find that he has a sketch, if you will, of where he's buried them all, kind of thing. And maybe there is
interesting
where more of them are. I would go back to Gary's point about it seems awfully odd that there aren't any these long periods where they don't find any. Okay, so.
Very interesting. And we let's get back to that. Remind me, that would be, part of obviously one subset of his personality. Gary, go ahead. What were you going to say?
Well, I was just going to say that in the research I did on offenders that engage in torture, one of the most interesting quirks that they have, and it doesn't surprise me, is that they're all collectors. They all collect something: paper money, stamps, our antiques, whatever. I think it's a control thing. And what's interesting about those kind of people is you see, even in the pattern of what they do with their victims, that they're brought together. It's almost like the architect was building a cemetery, they're all brought together into one little collection that you can visit, like a museum or a gallery or whatever. And my guess is that this is somebody who would probably revisit in some way, whether it's photographic or in closing his eyes and remembering it, or going and looking at that grounds. And we also know he was Googling or whatever all over the place to look at the family members of victims, but also like keeping photos of the family members of victims and Googling to look at the investigation, in addition to extensive pornography. He's a very visual guy. And I think we have to picture him every once in a while going out there to that little collection of bodies. And he probably knows where there are more. I'd bet my life. And just kind of basking in that and how he would have felt. And the idea that this was all right under people's nose, that this was going on, would have really made him say, you think I'm a schlub, but you know what I really am? You could even imagine this guy, when a body was found, going out, hosing the lawn or something, and saying to his neighbors, gee, what a scary place we live in, huh? Scary to think what kind of guy would do something like that. And the sadism of knowing that he was the did it, and that he had that power, that if he wanted to, he could have lured you in the house and done it to you. So that I think that's the whole key to this guy. And if I'm right about that, he's going to talk, because he'll like that everyone now sees him as having joined the pantheon of serial killers in the heyday of of when there were a lot of them. And I think we're going to learn a lot. I think once, if he is found guilty, he's going to sing, and then all of a sudden you're going to start to hear about piles and piles of these. That's the typical story. What do you think, Dr. Hawk?
Yeah, I agree. Because I don't know much about this particular case. I want to give you a little bit of a reflection on the Icelandic reality in this, the wife. So I kind of prepared to give a little lecture tonight because I wasn't sure what was going to happen. So I called it Icelandic Women and the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly Americans. So basically what I wanted to say is that Icelanders who moved to America, I mean, since let's say the 40s, 50s, there were many American soldiers here during World War II and in the aftermath during the Cold War, and quite often, there were quite many Icelandic women that fell for them, and they were brought back. They brought them to the States, and it was, I mean, sometimes it was a success story, sometimes it wasn't. And I think one thing, if there's anything that has to do with Icelandic reality and the wife as being of Icelandic descent, and who he is and what has happened, I think Icelanders, those two cultures are very different. They're hugely different. They're much more different than we kind of think they are. I mean, we speak rather decent English, relatively, but it's very different, and I think that causes quite a lot of struggle sometimes within families, and it might not always be ideal. I've been to venues where Icelanders who immigrated to the United States kind of gathered, and I was kind of shocked. They were kind of dislocated somehow and very drunk, and it was kind of a horrible situation in a way that I felt I was experiencing there. So I think in many cases that this has been has played out in many different ways, and sometimes it might be acted out as a controlling thing.
That was going to be my question. I mean, is there a dynamic here that,
well, I don't know,
he can control even his marriage to his wife? I mean, what's the culture?
Or the opposite, or whatever. I wanted to also mention the main actor in the Texas Massacre movie from the 1980s, 1973, Gunnar Hansen. He was of Icelandic descent too, so that's kind of, and there are some we have some other cases where Icelanders are kind of involved in something that is kind of is kind of criminal, or like, to the dark side of things. But I don't know the particular story of Ásagurni, but there might be some addictions, there might be some personality issues, there might be some feeling of being displaced, trying to hold it all together, whatever, and it might play out somehow, and it could trigger some things in in the couple or in each one of them, something like that. It's just a speculation.
Well, and I think I should point out for the people in chat, Dr. Hawk is in Iceland.
Yeah.
And so
Right.
he's from Iceland. So everybody's asking what's Iceland got to do with this?
That's right. Yeah.
I think they came in late. We've got over 3,000 people here. And I just want everybody to know he's actually in Iceland, and he has a whole understanding of not only the culture, but he's very well renowned there. So let's get into the investigation aspect.
To answer the question, I mean, the wife was of Icelandic descent. That's why I'm here.
Yes. And how many people live in Iceland? That's a good question. Approximately
400,000 people. Yes. Yeah.
How many?
400,000.
Wow, that's not that's a pretty interesting population. I mean, that number seems a little low.
Yeah,
and not as many people get on the L train with me.
That's right. Yes. Yeah. And let's say if we left Iceland in the 70s, let's say so, like 80s, 70s. I mean, we didn't have any foreigners here. We didn't see people of different colors or different. We were all kind of. It was like a one big extended family.
Wow, interesting. And culturally, how are these,
reality hugely different? Yeah.
Culturally, how are these marriages viewed by families? I mean, it seems like every time he would be triggered, to Anne's point, she, she was gone. She came to visit her family in Iceland.
From our perspectives, it was kind of somehow envy, kind of being married to a rich American, having immigrated to the world of opportunities. It was also like a sense of betrayal. You have betrayed us. Who do you think you are? That kind of a thing. I mean, we cannot go there, but we have many interesting stories about complications that have to do with Icelandic Americans' marriages or relationships.
Well, I wonder, Anne and Gary, and chime in here. I wonder if that created some type of friction from the get-go. If he wasn't accepted into the family.
I don't know nothing about it, so it's just a speculation. I can only give you the general idea. I mean, we have to. I can give you one example. I mean, it from both sides. I remember one story that I heard that was a Icelandic woman that married to an American soldier. They moved to the United States. She had to leave her 2 children behind, and she was never allowed by the American to connect to them because they were the son and daughter of actually another American who died on D-Day in Normandy. So kind of I met with the kids when they were grown-ups, and they had never been allowed to meet with her mother. And so it kind of gives a little bit of it can get really complicated somehow.
Sure.
And also for an Icelandic, let's say a country girl or a country to try to live up to the American lifestyle, it's a very, very different reality.
Interesting. And she was going back to the well and dipping into the culture.
I think she's probably of second generation. I don't know if she's born in Iceland.
It would also, Chris, be interesting what his background was, Heuermann. It looks German, but that's only from looking at the name. I just wonder, because when you talk about 2 cultures getting together, that always can be an issue. And I think in this case, it's going to pan out that there is something in the dynamics of that, whether as Hawk is saying. So we can keep an eye out for that as more information comes out.
So let's talk about the investigative steps here. Let's shift gears just for a moment.
Chris, can I just say something very quickly?
Of course.
That I think we also want to remember, first of all, he's got a special needs son, which is interesting. And also interesting is that the wife has been employed for a very long time as a nurse, stably much loved, as I understand it, at a hospital, major hospital here in New York. And I would posit a person who was considered very loving and kind, and probably was a kind of a glue for a guy who, my guess would be, didn't really have particularly stable and controlled relationships. And I would speculate that what's probably going to happen is that she is for years going to reel with the reality that she was having a relationship with somebody who was wearing a mask. And that would be my strong sense. She sounds like a person who's kind of all heart, that would, that would saw goodness in a kind of a ferocious person somehow. And I think it's interesting to think about that. Dr. Hawk had said that earlier, that this is really probably going to turn out to be a great tragedy. But I think thinking of him with a special needs child is interesting too. I mean, and wouldn't you say that raises a whole interesting dynamic to think about?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think that the family issues are going to be very important as you reconstruct that. But anyway, moving back to the investigation.
Investigation.
Yeah, let's talk about some of the steps. So in January 22, there's a new set of eyes. They organize an experienced task force membership from the DA's office all the way to experienced investigators. They take a look at the evidence again. They review the evidence again. They go back to in March 14, 22, they discover in the reports an eyewitness of the Chevy avalanche. And this goes early on in the investigation where one of the girls was picked up. There was a ruse in relationship to, ripping him off, basically. And then he circles back, and the eyewitness said, the guy left in a Chevy, etc. He circles back on his burner phone to that ultimate victim and says, "Hey, what you did was not a good thing." And I know how that works. I was a vice detective for many years in Southern California, and sometimes when they do a burn like that on a John, it has disastrous results. And so they get into this investigation pretty heavily, where they drop over 300 legal documents, search warrants, etc., into the environment, and then they start figuring out his background, probably some of his family dynamics. Obviously, they connected her leaving the country, and then they also discover that he has a couple of fake accounts opened up. Not only email, but he's purchased burner phones, and he's connected those burner phones to those accounts, utilizing those email addresses. And so the digital footprint starts to connect the victims to the burner phones, and then ultimately to the suspect. And so then they start looking digitally online billing accounts, and they begin to link him, and they discover thousands and thousands of sadistic porn sites found on various devices, and primarily through the phone companies, and of course Google, et cetera, through search warrants. But then they looked at his search inquiries. I'm really fascinated with you guys weighing in on, all of this just looks like id screaming here, unsolved serial killers. And, the list goes on, America's 5 most notorious. And I'm not even going to put up the child pornographic stuff. I mean, that guy was just way out there. And Gary, he's in your lane, and Ann, where you guys have studied these guys. So give us an understanding of this personality.
Well, I think Ann is really pioneered, this kind of work. So I think we certainly should begin with Ann. And maybe, what do you think about what his pornography history would tell us about his fantasy life?
Right. Well, it gives us an idea as to how extreme it is. That's what I would want to know. Certainly the titles you would want to look at the titles. But the list that Chris has up on the screen is more on the terrifying active serial killers. We can't, so he's looking at the unsolved cases, probably seeing how long he's going to be able to go as an unsolved killer. And then the second half gets into the actual victims and what is going on in the investigation. And we know from our work with serial killers, they love to be part of the investigation. And I think that's why he also contacts families, is it's not only the harassment issue, but it's also a satisfying part of the fantasy that he's developed, that he has this whole, whatever the original fantasy is, and then how it escalates, because we know that it does escalate. There've got to have been incidents that happened before he starts killing, where he's kind of practicing, if you will. That's a thing that we saw with Dahmer. They would practice before he went into something. So that's where I think some of the there might be some juvenile history, although he starts so late. The other thing is, of course, he is busy at school and he does have relationships. He was married before. So there are a number of other kinds of things that go on. But in terms of knowing that he's going to be looking at these things from an investigation standpoint, they will learn. You can piece together so much just from this list and from other lists that they've been able to copy from investigation.
Yeah, and just so everybody knows, we got 3,200 people in here right now. You guys know how I am on this channel. I have those search, parameters that he went down. Okay. I don't think there's any need, in my opinion, to put that, into the show here. We get the message when he talks about, sadistic child pornography and his victimology and all of this other stuff. Other channels can do that. Let them do that. Great, wonderful. But in this channel, everybody on this panel has dealt with these guys for years. And we know what they do. And we know how gruesome and we know how sadistic that behavior can be. So that's why I choose not to put it up on a presentation like this, because we're going to get to Gary here in 30 seconds, and he's going to give you a real taste of reality based on those searches, because he's reviewed them. He knows what they are. Anne has seen them. I mean, I know Doc has seen it. Doc Hawk has seen them in the past, but I don't like just promoting it out front here on this particular channel. So I hope you understand, and forgive me if you wanted to see them, but they are extremely disturbing to the point where even my wife said, do not show them this stuff on this channel. And so I'm following orders of my wife as well as my heart in this. I don't think it's necessary. But Dr. Gary, give us your insight into this particular mind based on what you know.
Well, based on, the typical male who commits serial sexual homicide, and based on the work of people like Anne, who really broke ground in terms of that field, I think what we could posit is a person who probably came from some kind of background where things were out of control, where there was some aggression, let's say drinking, fighting, abuse, some kind of unstable relationship. You could count on just a couple of hands, men who do this, who didn't come from homes where there was chaos of that sort. And probably what happened was that in adolescence, or when going out in the world and first discovering in post-puberty sex, this became paired with a mixture of terrible feelings of rejection and isolation and being out of control. And he probably developed an extremely rich fantasy life in which women were being tortured, assaulted, possibly children. And he was sort of standing above them and laughing or using ligatures or devices or so forth to feel an incredible godlike power over them. And what probably would have happened is that over time, he would have, being a planner type, would have meticulously laid out a fantasy that he then went out and started, shall we say, casting, finding people, he used the internet, I think, to kind of fit that fantasy, and then would have had a kind of a ritual. You have to picture a person that had a very organized, methodical kind of way of operating, where first you find the victim, then you kind of, make them feel foolish by luring them. The wife is out of the house. He probably had a whole variety of instruments and ropes and things that were kind of laid out, and then plays out the ritual. And my guess would be that afterwards, I would imagine that killing the victim was probably, just to sort of get rid of a witness. For some of these guys, the killing is part of the sexual thrill. For some of them, they're disappointed when the victim dies because the point was to torture them as long as possible and play out a fantasy. So we don't know if, like Bundy, for example, the killing would have been part of the erotic thrill, or if the idea was that they were discarded simply because they were used like what David Parker Ray used to call a package that needed to be discarded. The rat, I think Jerry Brudos, the serial killer, used to say that it was like throwing away the wrapping on a cigarette box when he was done smoking the cigarettes. So we don't know what would have played out there. What you would expect to see in this kind of person as he fueled his fantasies would be a variety of paraphilic, sexually perverse interests. He was probably, looking on the internet for things that would feed interest in seeing women killed, tortured, fooled, manipulated, etc. But that wouldn't have been enough all the time. I also think it would be very interesting to see if we saw the search history where, like, you could see it in real time. I would be interested to see if he was going back and forth between viewing the pornography and looking up himself on the internet, right? So you picture a person who gets aroused reading that the whole world is out there looking for this person slithering like a snake underneath them, feels powerful, and then immediately go over and, let's say, masturbates looking at this kind of pornography. Because you imagine that kind of was a fuel for this guy, that aroused him and inflated him kind of narcissistically. The other thing that's interesting about these guys, I would be very curious about, is every time you hear about one of these splitter, compartmentalized serial killers, you start to get these stories from the partners, even the ones that supposedly didn't know what was going on with them, where they start to say things like, it's weird. Sometimes in bed, he would ask me to do this really weird thing, or I walked in on him in the bathroom and he was doing this strange thing. So you hear things like BTK's wife walking in on him engaging in autoerotic asphyxiation, or Ted Bundy's partner, saying that they would ask him, he would ask the woman to play dead, things like that. So I think what we're probably going to find out eventually, when the shock wears off and the story starts to come out, is that there were times when some of this need for domination would play out, probably even at home during so-called normal lovemaking, or there was a lack of interest in it entirely because of, that he couldn't see the partner the way that he needed to. But I think, and wouldn't you say, I mean, that's pretty much the progression we normally see based on your work. I mean, did I miss anything there?
No, until you miss anything. But the other thing I'd like to know is the dates of they list the searches, but I'd like to know the dates. In other words, is it,
yes,
especially between 2012 and 2020, where this 10 years, something is going on there. And now, is he doing searches then, or is he just acting out? Is he getting more into children? Because it is interesting that if he's in his, what do we figure, late 30s or 40s when he kills the 4 that he's charged with, and they were very young, as I understand it, very small, and he's very large. If you see a picture of him, he's very large. So what is that all about? This very big guy and these, like 100-pound, 5'2" young women. Whether that was a factor in his, when he would target them, did he know that? Did he have specific kinds of measurements that he wanted? I mean, all of that would help to put into how he is building his fantasy and how he is getting into the sadistic part. Because it clearly, everybody, we don't know about the murders. I mean, because there's just remains. I think they know that there was strangulation. I don't know, Chris, correct me if you know. The other thing is one of the victims was running away and said they're after me, called 911, and then that was it. So she said they're after me, or he's going to kill me, or something to that effect. So one did try to get away, and obviously was not successful. So
Yeah. And
Chris,
right.
it is kind of weird, Chris, that a guy who used burner phones would use search engines from his computer to look these things up. I mean, why would you, on the one hand, take such steps, and on the other hand, look? It almost makes you think that it wasn't entirely about evading capture. It was just part of the ruse to fool the person into that if they knew who he really was, perhaps they wouldn't be so afraid of him or think much of him, or it was part of a kind of a mask. But as far as getting caught, he was lousy. So I mean that doesn't make sense unless the masking with the burner phones was about something more psychological and hiding behind some kind of curtain with these women. I mean, doesn't the rest of the group see that as a kind of a inconsistency in his MO that is going to have to be explained?
Yeah, absolutely. Dr. Hawk, what do you think?
Yeah, well, I think I mean, someone who does something like that, it's something very primal going on. I mean, it's you know, the other person is not a person, and I mean, he doesn't see it's a split up reality. It's like I think the insights from Melanie Klein are very interesting in this. It's like somehow in the development of the mind of the experience of that person has somehow been kind of fragmented or split up. So basically the ability to see the other, especially the woman, is not there. So a woman is not a person or a whole or a human being. It's something that is a playground for some very dark-sided, fragmented fantasies. And I mean, I've talked to guys that have had something like that. It's very kind of, it's awful. It's kind of scary. But what also comes with it is a very great sense of there's like a sense of void. I don't know if you feel that. I felt that too. There's something is not resonating within that person. So, and from a theory or whatever, it's like the fragmentation is not in the person that they are torturing or dismantling. It's within themselves.
Yeah.
So that's kind of, so they project a very fragmented image of themselves up on the others, and it gets violent. Yeah.
But it also dichotomizes women. Women are either good or they're bad, and
that's right. Yeah, either or. Yeah, that's right.
He really goes into the bad that he picks on and targets women that are sex workers or escorts or whatever.
Yeah, that's true.
And that we've certainly seen early on. They used to. They would. There was a good woman, and that would be probably the woman he married, his daughter, that kind of thing. But then there are these other women, and they are to be just discarded.
And they can show off with the wife somehow in a particular way, but then they have the other side where it gets more kind of strange about that, like, even about excrements, about this and burning and this and that. It's strange, and that's what you're saying, Gary. I mean, sometimes it kind of pops up like in the midst of in the relationship. You know, it's like, you know, in the bad scenario, all of a sudden something really strange pops up. You know, that might be an indication of something. Also, the animals. I mean, you know, we have talked about that, and even with you know, early on they might start to torture. You know, torturing animals might be an indicator too, or toilet ritual, something, you know, something that's very private, very like kind of yeah, part of reality that we are usually don't expose so much to the outer world. We try to hide.
So I want to throw a curveball. Over the weekend, they pulled a life, size child doll in a glass enclosure out of his house with what we know, the types of things he was thinking, or at least researching, not necessarily thinking, but researching. What's the panel say about that piece of the puzzle? Dr.
Well,
Burgess?
I'd say that's a symbol. That's a symbolic aspect. There's something that happened with a child. I take it was female child, right? Or you couldn't tell. It was female. So there's something about a female child or childhood, or something happened, and maybe something happened that he did to a child or something. But I would be willing, and that represents it. And he keeps it in this glass enclosed cabinet as a shrine. Almost sounds like a shrine. Do we know where he had it? Did he have it in a special room? Did he have it on a special pedestal or something like that? All of that would be something that you'd want to see what the meaning was. But I'm sure that had something to do with when these fantasies got started. You know, Gary, if you want to weigh in.
Well, when you look at men who commit serosexual homicide, there are a variety of ways that they stimulate themselves visually. And this became much easier, of course, with the advent of technologies, like the internet and Polaroid photography and things like that, that allowed some, film, things that allowed private kind of visual experimentation. But in the days before that, what I believe, and I've talked to Vernon Gayberth, the great authority on serious sexual homicide, about this. Probably one of the things that men did who engaged in this was they either drew or they used dolls, and it is thought that they probably would make a little kind of effigy of a child or a person and kind of do whatever they wanted to do with it, or they would draw it out. But they need some kind of visual way to engage in that. And there are serial killers, for example, David Parker Ray, who would keep dolls and when nobody was looking, sort of bind them, do things to them, and find that sexually arousing. It's a kind of a substitute for a human being. But what I think is so telling, and this reminds me a little of the BTK case, is that in the BTK case, for example, when we look at the killing of the Otero family, that it almost looks as if the family is killed to mask that the adults are killed, to mask that the interest might have really been Joey, the little boy, and the girl who's killed in the basement, hanged in the basement, who are children, right? So that you almost wonder if what you're dealing with is somebody who, underneath all of this, is ultimately kind of an arrested person, that kind of, there's something about like almost like an attraction to children or something. And I think it's not surprising when you think about that doll alongside what we know from the searching on the internet, that there seems to be this fixation around prepubescence that is interesting psychologically. And it almost feels like, when you, based on what we know about him, that it was really with the advent of puberty that his life seems to have gone downhill in terms of people picking on him and making fun of him and all that. We don't know what childhood was to this guy, what kind of island it might have been in his life. Also interesting is when you think about this idea that I put together one day, about the prototype, right? It's interesting to think who is the original person that is being killed through repeatedly killing these surrogate victims. Who is the prototype, right? And when with men who commit serious sexual homicide, particularly where there's a little torture, right? Uh, which is, I think, being speculated about here. You have to say, who is this guy so mad at? Who is this original source of rejection, or that made him feel so insecure? And we just don't know yet. But you can rest assured that one will be discovered. because you don't develop that kind of anger and rage toward women out of nowhere. It could be that women were giant mass that kind of collectively felt like they rejected him, right? Or it could be that there was an original person. But Anne, wouldn't you say eventually we're going to discover there was a source?
Oh, absolutely do. I can remember one case I worked out of North Carolina, Scott Williams, and when I always try to go to the crime scene so I can get a real. And when I went in, he lived in a trailer on his mother's property, and in one room he had built these bookshelves on the top all the way around, and there must have been 100, if maybe 200 Barbie dolls, and they were all pristine, some still in the little casing and so
Boxes. Mhm.
yeah, little boxes, absolutely. And he would spend a lot of time, going and getting them. And that was very important to him. And we did talk about what that all meant. But the one thing you didn't want to do is to touch one of those dolls. I wasn't going to get my hands on one of those dolls because he would have lost control, I'm sure. But anyway, the issue of dolls, I think, Chris, is very important. I would agree that whatever this doll is, who it looks like, where it is, it represents something very important.
Do you think if it belonged to another family member, let's say, his daughter or something, and he took control of it, what would be the significance connection to that, you think, if any?
Is it an actual doll or is it a new doll? Or we don't know
just
the
the PD information I know is the PD removed this glass container doll. I'm just wondering if he built the container,
or
because
the
he's a
doll.
woodworker.
Is
Or
it a
the
wooden
doll.
doll?
Yeah. I don't know. Yeah, that's a great question. That is a great question.
It certainly means something. I don't know.
And people are saying that
it reminds me of it was actually not a man, but like it was a girl that I was treating. She was really evil. I mean, she was referred to me because the teachers were telling me, she needs treatment because she is so evil. She's so evil, and and she was kind of really torturing other children all the time. And basically, when I touched her totems, so to speak, so the things that that were like, she had like a collection of stuff like that, and she punished me like harshly. I was thrown into a pit full of worms, and I had to be there, and I was totally at her disposal, and being tortured by her, and that had to go on for quite a long time. I had to give her the opportunity to really act out her frustration and anger and total dominance over me as the therapist. She would throw things at me, but she never threw it right at me. She always missed. But I think it might. But this guy never had the opportunity to meet anyone in therapeutic settings to take out all of that anger, kind of a thing. But it was quite interesting to see how it got triggered. And I can imagine how it is to be, I can only imagine or try to imagine, or maybe I cannot, to be not in the stronghold of the therapist, but being found on Craigslist or on Tinder or God knows what, and all of a sudden now you're in the hands of someone who is so loaded with anger, and all of your symbolic, if you touch upon any of the things that, and you're set up, you don't have much of a chance. I mean, it's so much rage. This girl was 5 years old,
Wow.
This guy is a tall guy that is like loaded with something similar, and it's very frightening when a 5-year-old puts discharges that upon you. So I can only imagine what. Yeah, but I think it's a similar. I think I've been close to it on few occasions in therapeutic settings on an earlier stage, and I think it's let's hope that a guy like this, if we could have met him on an earlier on, that we could have saved him and his victims. What do you think about that? Do you think we could have Anne and Gary? Could we save them?
Well, that's what you try to do in therapy, especially when you get children and get them in therapy. As you said, you could have some very angry, acting out youngsters, and it's one thing if they're 5 years old; it's another thing if they're 15.
That's right. Yes. Well, yeah.
Yeah, you can't do that. Yeah.
Well, 15. Yeah. Well,
physically, yeah, you'd have to find other methods.
Mm-hmm.
So, Gary, what were you going to say?
I would speculate that based on the personality structure that we're at least glimpsing, although we don't know without evaluating him, that this is the kind of person who, dating back to his youth, would have had a whole variety of versatile kind of criminal actions. And indeed, we are seeing that, all kinds of things having to do with tax and kind of trickery and so forth. And, so that you get the sense of a person who would have had a deviance in personality from a young time. But the thing is, if you take a person who's got that kind of sensation-seeking, grandiose kind of personality, and he's loved and kind of, he might apply it in a more pro-social kind of way, right? So he might be fearless and sensation-seeking and willing to, throw himself in front of a bullet to save someone, as opposed to, targeting people in an antisocial way. But we just don't know. I mean, unfortunately, you can't do a study where, the independent variable is, do we do therapy with this psychopath and see if the person kills? It wouldn't pass an IRB, But the other thing is, I'll just say quickly, is that people that I've looked at, people would be fascinated to see my spreadsheets and databases I keep based on the news. But I'll tell you, when you do a quick search there and you look at serial killers who had dolls, what is fascinating is that there is a proclivity for them to engage in necrophilia. And I don't think that that's shocking, because it's the idea of the reduction of a human being to a kind of marionette, that you can do whatever you wish to, right? For example, you remember Moskvin, the Anatoly Moskvin, the linguist and the polyglot academic, who wound up having 20 some odd women that had been mummified and kept as dolls in his home, that he would use in perverse ways. And there are other examples of this I could give, but you get the sense of where part of the control is this need for complete manipulation of an anatomical being, like a anatomical thing that's like a person, like an object, but minus all the unpredictability and the chaos of having to actually have a relationship with them. And that's the thing that gives this schizoid quality, that there's not even any talking necessary. It's just a pure object, And I think that's what you start glimpsing with this guy, is that weirdness and that need to possess a thing as if it's a toy. And that gets right to what I think Dr. Hawk is talking about with this Kleinian partial object kind of objectification stuff. And this is not, that's why immediately when I see people in the media comparing him to like Bundy, it's very problematic for me. This is not that kind of psychopathic person who is slick and charming like that. He would have been more off-putting, like a weird, like more like a Kemper or a Ridgway kind of a personality, that people would say, that guy's strange. It's not, I mean, he might be charming in an awkward way, but not charming in a, women all over the world are sending him love letters kind of way. Right. That kind of thing. I mean, Anne, wouldn't you say he's got a weirdness to him, doesn't he? Yeah.
He does. He has some social competence, but not really low competence, because he can, like I said, he can have a job. He has been married twice. He has a daughter, so there's some semblance there. But I think there is some of that has come across on the internet of people finding him odd, and I think I've seen that. Yeah, I was going to get back to the forensic evidence.
Yeah, go ahead, Ann.
I don't know whether I think it's fascinating that they found hair. That shows you the detail that they got into there. that he could find the female hair is taken from belts used to tie and tape used to bound the victims. It would be very important to actually see those bindings, because he's into bondage. Clearly, that's part of the developing fantasy of tying people up
And this was a male victim, by the way.
This is from a male victim.
This was one of the male victims. Yeah.
Oh, okay. And he
was
okay.
transgender, right, Chris? Was he
I believe.
trans?
Yeah. Well, I may be wrong on that in terms of, whether he was trans or not, but it was definitely the bindings on that individual victim based on what I've read. And somebody keep me honest if I'm wrong here, but I'm pretty sure because I read it in the information.
Well, that would be interesting to see if he was trans and the suspect misinterpreted him, thinking he was female.
Yeah.
You
like
know a
payback.
little more on that. But isn't there's still 6 that they haven't tied to him, but and one was a woman with a young infant or toddler.
Yes.
Yeah. And we would I probably don't know whether anything happened to the child, whether there was any sexual assault to her or him.
Well, what's interesting here, yes, he was trans based on what folks are reporting out. So yeah,
I think he was beaten to death, bludgeoned, right? So
yes,
Joanne's point, it might have been something like, "I'm furious that you fooled me."
Yeah.
And so rather than just torturing the victim and doing the thing, it would have been some kind of insult to his, manhood or something. So he just kind of beat the
which
poor
goes
guy
back to the first victim.
Right.
Remember where he gets on the
Suspect,
burner phone and calls her back and said, "You ripped me off. You shouldn't have done that," basically. And I'm paraphrasing, of course, but the messaging there, the behavioral messaging there is, you don't do that to me.
Yeah.
And next thing you know it, she's out there. But what's fascinating here, and what you guys take on this, is the female hair strands has to be connected back to that house somehow, or the vehicle that he's using to transport. What do you think?
Yes. Yeah.
It's the wife's hair. The
Yeah,
wife's hair.
It came back that they could not exclude her as the donor. And then, of course, we get now the pizza box on January 26th this year, where he's under, they've got him under the radar now, where they've got surveillance teams all over him. They're watching him go in, buy more minutes on his burner phones. They're connecting, all of these dots. And then January 26th, undercover detectives collect that pizza box that he threw away in Manhattan. Probably around your office, Gary. And
Yes, I could walk there.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. All right.
I didn't mean that as a joke. I mean,
no, it's true. Right.
And so they send that to the lab, and they pull. They had one male hair from one of the previous victims, so they have both male and female hair. And they do a swab on the pizza crust, and lo and behold, they took that male hair from the burlap where some of the victims were wrapped up, and bingo, they're back in the ballpark as, hey, we can't exclude this guy. Next thing you know it, they move on him, and on July 13th, he's in custody, and he has that burner phone on his possession with him. Why do you think that's? Help everybody understand that significance, right?
Yes. Wow.
What do you think, Ann?
That's good. I'm trying to make sure that he gets linked to the crime, because they can try this saying it's just all circumstantial, and
Right.
Hair is hard if they don't have the root of the hair.
Right.
So where do they get the hairs from his wife? I guess from the house.
Well, from the duct tape on one of the victims, they have
to match. How do they match it? It's got to be one that they actually know is hers.
They come back with a 99, hit on her,
Okay.
based on some other investigative avenues that they went down.
Okay.
And so, what this is his dad's house. What do you think about that? This is where he lives.
Wow.
The one who built furniture with him.
His
Yeah.
dad's
That was there.
house?
Yeah, this is his father's house.
Oh, this is the childhood house. They say that he lived in the house. Oh, okay. This is where he grew up, right?
Yes.
It's a pretty small house.
Doesn't exactly look warm and toasty, does it?
No.
Yeah, they had
But,
removed
yeah.
trash out of this resident. Are they on the curb? The undercovers grab the trash, the bottles, and link the hair back to the wife.
Wow.
So, but what do you think of the house? I mean,
Chris, didn't he lose his father very young?
I believe he was 12. My understanding.
Right. And the
Which
mother
might have been very activating for him, and I think that because remember we were talking about something happened around 10, 11 because he's
Sure.
fixated on that age.
Yep.
The death of his father comes almost around exactly that age. That might have been an enormous symbolic
Sure.
kind of a loss for him. I'm sure Dr. Hawk would agree. I mean that's a wouldn't you say psychoanalytically the fixation at age 10, 11 based on his search history and the loss of his father at almost exactly the same age are an interesting coincidence.
Yeah.
But much more needs to be going on there because I mean many kids lose their parents at 12, 10 to 12.
Right.
I mean there's something there's something going on a very much deeper level, I would think. I mean,
Yeah.
there's he didn't develop in some very fundamental ways respect for the other somehow. It's like it's not there. I mean, otherwise you would to take someone out like this in that kind of private way. I mean, it's not a kind of part of. I mean, people are killing each other all the time. In the name of culture and heritage and God knows what. Gender, this and that. But this is more like secretive. It's more like it's not. He's on a very private, odd, strange, primordial mission somehow.
Yeah.
And mind you, he has other properties.
Yeah, I would think it's very early developmental issues.
Right. And then he's left with the mother, and I know he has a brother. I don't know if the brother is older or younger. But then the mother becomes the primary caregiver for his adolescent years, and he stays in the house. I think it's described in one of the on the internet as a scrambled house or something is what they.
Yeah, he has a couple other residences, but this one is, I think, a footprint of his early adolescence. I mean, him being an architect, I mean, certainly he could have, you would think. And what do you think? I mean, the fact, is this the house that he would take, as Jim says, is this the strangle house?
Right. This is the house where he takes his victims. Do we know that? We think that?
I don't know that.
Yeah.
Why would the wife's hair be there unless it was some residence or some place that he shared with the wife?
Well,
that's why I thought it was their home. I mean, you could almost imagine him using the same bed he slept in with his wife. And her hair is all over it and stuff, something like that. I mean, it didn't seem like he took them off somewhere like to a workshop or something like some other serial killers do. It was probably right there. And so, I mean, this is this like this person is saying, it must be the same place that he lives, that he was bringing the victims. Also, one thing that just before it leaves my mind, is that when you were showing that image of the discarded pizza box, I'm very interested in this symbolism that sometimes comes up in the arc of a story of a serial killer, and there is something strangely poetic. It's like a poetic justice to somebody who discarded people, who threw them in literally like they were trash, being captured because of what he discards. in the trash. It's almost like be careful what you throw out in the garbage, because you think it's nothing, but in it is a treasure that leads to you being captured. Right? It's like a kind of there's a strange symbolism to that I find really interesting. And and it's that same thing with like dumping the bodies right near your house. It's almost as if in some symbolic way you don't think that you're that visible or that powerful or whatever, so that it would never draw any attention to you. It's a kind of an interesting thing analytically to think about what that says about this guy. And so that I think ultimately what seems to be playing out is some sense of pathetic kind of absolute worthlessness that you imagine is at the heart of this person, and some kind of instability of relationships, where the idea is to want objects where you always know where they are, like where they're all dumped in the same place, and you can manipulate them any way you want because they're bound and they can't leave you unless you want them to, and all of that. So that I think abandonment or unpredictability of relationships is somewhere in the psychology of this guy. Dr. Hawk, wouldn't you say there seemed to be glimpses of somebody who felt that there was his attachments were problematic, that there was like some kind of fearful, anxious quality of attachment where he thought he was going to lose people all the time or something, or that they weren't predictable love objects?
I mean, all of that is a total mess in the mind of a person like this. I mean, it's like it's totally ruined. I mean, there's something. It's such a drastic measure. What I want, I wonder why the delay? Why there must have been a building up to all of this. Why all of a sudden in 2010? What's the trigger point? There must be other indications along the way. I mean, people say that actually Iceland just published now the newspapers. There's a long, I think it's mainly a translation from the New York Times. People are saying that he was kind of awkward, strange, scary. Kids in the neighborhood were recommended not to go to on Halloween to ask for candy from, that kind of stuff. There's something. There must be an indication for a long time.
Well, when did the first wife? When was the split between the first wife and then the second wife?
That I don't know.
That could be.
Well, maybe they have it here. It's like
yeah. I mean, that is strange that the kids wouldn't even go to the house for candy on Halloween. That really tells you something.
You wouldn't go to that house for candy for Halloween, would you?
No.
I mean, it's scary looking.
Yeah.
Now, where is the water in relation to that, Chris? Where is the causeway, or is that just a road that I see behind that tree? That's not water, right?
Yeah, I don't believe it's water in, but it is within, a short distance. Gary, I mean, you know that geographic area better than probably always because you're in that neighborhood there.
This is Long Island,
right? It wouldn't have been a very long drive, and he would have probably known when there would be less activity and so forth of when to go over there and do that. But yes, I can't imagine it would have been a ride of more than 15, 20 minutes or something to water. Really was nervy to have them so close to where he resided. It really is quite amazing. It's sort of like Gacy having them right under the house, that kind of thing. Yeah, exactly. He was directly across, I think, from the
water. That's what one of your viewers said. It's across the water.
Yeah, they said it's a few blocks away. And to think now, and of course, this is just the tip of the iceberg, right? Where we're going to start seeing now the investigation's still ongoing. They've gone into a couple other residences where, he's been known to, go to. And so let me grab a couple of questions here. We've got 3,600, almost 4,000 people here. So you've got quite the arena listening to you. And we're an hour and 30 into this, but of course, I always like to be respectful of your time versus mine because I'll stay here for days. You guys all know me except for Dr. Hawk right now. I've just met him this evening, but Okay, so a couple of questions. And Gary, this one's for you. It comes up. I just read your newest books. Would RH be considered number 22 on your Graduates of Eagle scale?
So what the what Ash is asking about is Michael Stone's Gradations of Evil scale that he originally proposed in the Anatomy of Evil and on his television show Most Evil on Investigation Discovery. And then when I did the New Evil with him, which was the follow-up book in 2019, we sort of updated what was included in all the categories to make it far more comprehensive, because it was essentially looking at mostly at homicide. And the answer is no, because if there is the torture that we're talking about, so far we don't know how cruel, how sadistic that torture would be. With so you can have somebody of, let's say, the of the type to engage in some torture, like Jerry Brudos, where it was a little bit of slow strangulation or kind of pulling people up gradually off the ground to asphyxiate them. But a 22 involves extreme protracted torture, like doing things like electrocuting people or butchering them slowly, or so things like that. So that what you usually see in these guys, that's much rarer. What you usually see is more like a kind of a somewhat protracted but not extremely severe torture, so that most of these people would fall into the 18 category on the scale. And if there was no torture at all, if it was pure sexual homicide, that would be a 17 on the scale. The reason that it's interesting is because the people that fall into these categories are so alike that it almost serves as a profile. And everything that we're saying about this offender, I mean, he would be, it's like unbelievable how they all seem to follow this blueprint in terms of how their psychology unfolds, how the fantasies develop, how they, in an organized way, get the victims, what they do with them. And so if you have the book, I would take a look at 17 and 18 as probably being where this guy is going to be placed if it turns out that he's guilty.
Dr. Ann, what?
Also, yeah, go ahead.
Seeing how you're the only legend on this panel, what say you? What do you think? One question I want to I'll ask. I want to ask you because it just came up here. Is it normal? At what age do these individuals, from your research, start killing? Is there a specific time frame?
They start killing, at least in the 36 we looked at, in the adolescent age or late adolescence. They start their fantasies, though, develop from some kind of childhood issue as early as 5, 6. We've had several that were able to still describe how the fantasy started, but then they have to practice and it escalates and so forth. So they really don't start until, I'm thinking the earliest was 18, 19. But look at this man he was, what's the age, in his 30s?
In his 40s.
40. That makes me think that something else was going on well before that, unless there was another major event that triggered it. We don't know that. And I think we've
So would you consider him an anomaly then? That
yes.
if it turns out that there isn't earlier, indications of criminal activity?
Well, the fantasy can be there, but not be acted out on. It may have been able to keep a control. As we said, the wife might have been able to keep enough control on him, whatever role that, the dynamics of that relationship would be really important.
Right.
Interesting.
Yeah, Chris, it would be so much of an anomaly that if you were a betting man, you would bet that probably there were previous victims, or at least victims of sexual assault, that are not known yet, because it would, you would have to put him on a very special list of people that were missing all of these classic features. I think it's far more probable that he had the general progression that you see. And we're probably going to discover that he had a variety of perverse activities he was engaging in for a period of time, because he has to build up the nerve and the comfort with what he did. I mean, I can't imagine a person who has perfected, gotten a fantasy in his mind and says, okay, today's the day I'm going to act it out for the first time. My wife's away. I'm in my 40s. Okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to lure, a sex worker to the house, and I'm going to, have everything I need here, and I'm going to put her in burlap, and I'm going to put her in the truck and take her. Unless he had fantasized about that for years and years, it's I think more likely that he honed that MO through practice, rehearsal, and screw ups and mistakes. In fact, a lot of these offenders, the offenders that I've talked to, is that they say that a lot of them say that the first time they killed, they didn't really even necessarily intend it. They were engaging in rape or some other sexual assault, and then the person died during the process, and they got aroused by it, and they wanted it to kind of go better next time. But the idea to actually go out and say, today is the day I'm going to do this, and do it that calmly and that neatly, would make him too much of an anomaly. And I think we're going to discover that there's a story that went well beyond that. Even, for example, if you look at somebody like Bundy, everyone says, he started killing at a certain age, and we know who the first victim was. And then many years later, it emerged that his first victim was probably a little girl that he killed on a newspaper trail, on a paper route when he was young, and that was sort of his secret hidden victim. And then you watch the arc, and he ends with a 13-year-old. Right, goes right back to a victim that was around the age of the very first victim on the paper route. So that you get that kind of arc, that where I think in the end the curtain lifts and you see. The other thing I'll just say very quickly before it goes out of my head is that I'm fascinated by whether this burlap thing is a signature. I know that for example, in the Bible, this might interest you, Dr. Hawke, with your theological training, because I have that also. Is that I was interested in the symbolism of burlap, because in the Bible, wearing burlap is like a sign of shame, like a terrible sinner or a prostitute or somebody would wear burlap and walk the streets to be itchy and uncomfortable, right? So is there a symbolism to putting these women in burlap? That in other words, that he's calling them whores essentially, and I mean, Anne, wouldn't you say that would be
Sure. Yes, I think
quite a signature?
that you bring that up. The burlap is certainly such a different type of binding, and they were it looked like they were wide binds, so probably to bind the mouth to really not like a ligature kind of thing.
And Dr. Hawke, your burlap analysis, and then this question.
Yeah, I mean that could well be. Do they need to burlap? I mean, it's obviously he's categorizing people in categories of good and bad, or targets and non-targets, things like that. I was looking through your list, Gary, about different types. I mean, I haven't read your book, but I mean, what could it be? It's I mean, a displacement of hatred towards someone else. That's kind of a classical thing. I mean, a mastermind kind of a thing, attention seeker. There might be a little bit of that there too. That attention seeker. I don't know.
Oh yes.
Where the narcissism spills over into psychopathy,
that's right, yes, yeah,
and then moves its way into sadism. Yeah,
yeah,
right.
And yeah, so yeah, I agree with the symbolic of that.
It'll be interesting to see how that plays out. What do you think about this question about the Icelandic wife thread about early childhood bullying or rejection? Her return home is again rejection. Would there be a correlation to early childhood stuff and then her going back, do you think? Is that what do you think?
So coming back as a rejection?
Yeah, that it's kind of like, I'm out of here. I'm going back to my homeland.
Yeah. I still I don't know how much about her. I don't know much about her connection to Iceland. I didn't have much time to dig things up. only a few hours actually, but I think it's I mean Iceland is a very close. I mean, it's a very strong base to have. That's another thing that we have. I mean, every time when you talk to Icelanders, it doesn't take long until we say Icelandic this or that. You know, do you like the Icelandic this? Do you know, how do you like Iceland this and that? So I think, and it's a great thing on some level to have that base. It's different from cultures like, say, the US culture, when people are traveling so much all around. I mean, it's very, our sense of belonging is very strong. So if something happens, let's say we might quite quickly think of taking a refuge back to home, to that to our island, where it's safe, where it's safe. Things are very safe here. I mean, it's a small island. It's, you know, no enemies around. It's like a part of NATO. It's like a, you know, you have to, if you want to come on to get us, you really have to make a big effort. So it's a safe place, where one of the safest places in the world.
That's fascinating insight.
Yeah.
Because, you know, there may be, I mean, from an investigative position, I would want to know more about what that means. Because if there's all this chaos going on in her life here in Long Island, that would make me think, what more, has she found something? Did she discover something? And now she's going to break from it to just kind of clear her head. And I know that's all speculation, but that's from an investigative, you know, process.
I mean, the first thing that when you come over there is, I lived in New York for 5 years or 6 years. I mean, I felt the culture was very aggressive. So it's like a kind of, compared to here, where, you know, you're kind of left, you know, it's a very different vibe kind of a thing. And so I don't know if she left for Iceland. Is that known? In 2010, did she go to Iceland?
That would be, well, what's important, Chris, about that is she doesn't, she's not on Facebook after that, I don't think. There's a long...
No, 2015.
Oh, she is still on?
She does post, she updated her Facebook profile with a photo of herself with Rex in the background. I could post that to you. Do you want to see it?
Yeah, I've seen it. The other thing is, why doesn't he go with her?
Yeah, well,
I mean, if it's a family kind of a thing, you know, it wouldn't be that hard for him to go with her. So it's an area you really need to investigate. That's where it would be great to get some information on that.
Mm-hmm. But I think it's so if it's a rejection when she comes back, I mean, it's in a mind like that, it's very obscure. I mean, that's true. It's so, okay, you leave. Okay, you leave. I fend you off, or you fend me off. I'm left alone, and now you come back. And when you come back, I feel rejected. I think it could actually be, in a way. It's I mean, it's very. It can flip around quite a lot, actually. You know, you feel wounded when you come back. You feel wounded when you leave. It's like, it's a total mess. I mean, it's like, you know, don't you agree? You know, Gary, you know, you have been working with. It can be really strange. You know, no, it's like the alcoholic in a way. It's like, you know, you have to drink to celebrate if something happens, and if something bad happens, you have to drink. I mean, it's like, if you're very kind of narcissistic in the everything is kind of interpreted in a very obscure manner, and if you're like on the victim side, you know, you're always a victim. No matter, you know, you're rejected when someone comes home. You know, even that could possibly be.
Well, I think that's a very clever point, because if you think about it, when the person's not there, there's no possibility to disappoint them or to do anything that makes you feel that you're chasing them off or losing them, or they don't love you. When they're not there, you can make anything you want out of them.
That's
So
right.
that you get the sense of he has more control when they're gone. And and I think that gets right back to this point I was making in the beginning, that I think distance, and that distance from people, is very important. I think it makes him feel godlike and kind of powerful. But when he has to actually be on the ground with them, he stinks at it. He isn't good at it. And so I imagine that if she really is an object, the best thing for her is to exist only in theory and not actually be in the house.
Mhm.
Because when she's there, she's too much of a mirror of what he really is, probably.
Yeah.
And so that I think the way you put it is I think touches on a truth.
Hmm. And I mean, he might also like being avoidant, withdrawn, kind of, go, not go, and I need to attend to my fantasy world, but then it's kind of you're alone. And then you act out on it because you feel alone, and you are kind of just in doing so, because you are alone, you've been left alone, you're like miserable. It's kind of and and you go online and find someone to take it out on. That could be. It's all speculation. I mean, it's like I have to,
we're just
therapeutically, you have to feel the person. But I've seen a lot of kind of similarities to some extent. Yeah.
well.
Right.
What final wrap up thoughts? We'll just go around the panel. We've had you here almost 2 hours, and I know it's 2 o'clock in the morning there because I can still see it's light out, Dr. Hawk, behind
Yeah,
you.
it's
And
beautiful.
it's well, thank you all, each of you, for your expertise, and we've got much more to come. I'm sure of it. Coming up as we learn more about how this is going to unpack itself. And so I'll go around the room here, and final thoughts. We'll start with Dr. Hawk. Anything, and then we'll go to Gary, and then of course Anne. You can have the final word because again, my mother would never forgive me. And so, and you're the only legend on this panel outside of the other two friends here, but
That's right. Yeah.
you're the real deal here. So, Dr. Hawk, thank you so much for being with us. Final thoughts.
Yes, I see that someone wrote, it would be interesting to know how many serial killers there are in Iceland. At the moment, we have none, or maybe, well, I'm not sure. But we are all descendants of serial killers. The Vikings were more or less all serial killers, somehow, in some ways. But it was kind of part of the culture, so it was kind of allowed for. They would go and raid and kill and rape and come back with fortunes. So I was walking the streets of Melbourne in Australia. It's on the opposite side of the world, and someone had sprayed on the sidewalk, "Iceland is the freest nation on the planet." So nowadays we are very peaceful. It's a very safe, wonderful country. So I think we could, and we should, and apparently for this person who sprayed that thing on the sidewalk in Melbourne, in Australia, I think we can symbolize the ability to transform from being a serial killer to become something totally different. As both for individuals and as a culture. So what about that? I mean, the Russians are now kind of forcing their guys to be serial killers in a way, and we have stories like that all over the world. But here we were somehow able to make that move from being serial killers to become something else. And I think that will be my final remark tonight. Let's all try to move in that direction rather than in the other direction.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Gary, Dr. Burgess.
Thank you. What I would say is that unless this offender, and again, we must emphasize that we're not sure this person is guilty until proven in the court of law. But if he is, chances are he's not that special. And we're probably going to discover that a lot of the classic patterns are present in him. And we're going to discover probably a much wider pattern of aggression, violence. And what we're probably going to discover is that these people were so incredibly interchangeable to him that they were essentially meaningless as human beings. Tells you a great deal about how he felt, probably about himself, what was projected onto them. And what I think is instead of adding this guy to this kind of weird pantheon of infamy, that we put these serial killers into, we should instead try to concentrate on the fact that the people that he would have lured and killed. I mean, I've had patients that were prostitutes and sex workers, the things that lure them there, the pathetic backgrounds they come from. Some of them have children that they can't pay to raise. Some of them can't find work. Some of them are lost souls, people rejected by their family, drug addicted, alcohol addicted, sometimes people who have mental illness. We have to try to put the emphasis on that these people that he transformed into non-entities were human beings, and to try to remember them instead of the press being plastered with the face of this person. We haven't had that kind of serial killer in a while. There was this kind of drop off after the late 90s because of the technology that helps capture people before. And you see almost this kind of excitement in the true crime world, as if, we've got someone else in the annals of crime. And I just think, let's pause a moment and realize that these people had families and kids and so forth. And I think put an emphasis on that instead of this guy, just for a second. And I know Anne will echo that, because for us, it's really about these victims. Let's just say people won't be able to name these victims, but they'll be able to name the offender. And that bothers me. Right. Yeah. So, and what do you think?
Yes, I would agree. I think that the victims' families, they are ruined forever in terms of a tragedy. And I do also think that the families of the offender, who, if this turns out to be him, they suffer too. They usually have to change their name. They have to go to a different school or whatever. I mean, it's tragic for them also. And it's shocking. It may be shocking. It may not be. We won't know. But we really need to think in terms of trying not to add any more trauma at all possible to these victims' families. And I guess in closing, I'm just so delighted to see Dr. Hawk again. His country is beautiful. If you haven't visited, you should. It's really, really, I completely agree that it's a very safe country. And I only know the axe killer back in the 16th century is the only one I could ever find that was a serial killer. So they are very, very safe. So thank you. I'm so glad that you were able to get with us tonight. It's great to see you again. Thank you. And thank you.
Practically don't even have night there.
I know. Look at it.
Symbolic. It's like there's no darkness, literally.
At the moment, yeah. But there's a dark side to it too. So, like in psychology, there's a bright side and there's a very dark side. So,
are the northern lights out? No,
that's in the winter time.
In the winter time, right? Okay.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think I hope that. My mind is with the victims of this case, and I hope the wife is not part of it in any ways, and she will be good and having a. I mean, it must be a horrible thing that she's going through. Let's hope it's clear. It's a clear cut there. Thank you all. Thank you, Anne, and thank you, Gary. I hope to see you in person. And Chris,
absolutely. We're right around the block from each other.
That's right.
And just to kind of wrap it up, this is another reminder of I think each of us listening, those of you listening out there in cyberspace. It's just another reminder again to try to have another step forward to being a little bit kinder to one another, because we really are in this together. And what a great panel. And thank you all individually for being here tonight. And hopefully we'll see you again on the next one. As always, stay here on TIR, the interview room. Please share this. Go buy their books. Each one of their books is fascinating. If you have not had a chance to get them yet, we'll get Dr. Hawk's books links in there as well tonight. So until then, let's go to Hawaii, and we'll see you on the next one.
Hard working every day, I'm stressed out 24/7, babe. No timeouts, wish we could fly away. You and I go to our favorite place. Oh yeah, yeah. Make special memories together. I'll be your company now and forever. I say we fly away. You and me go to our favorite place. Feeling the sun on my face in Hawaii. With you, Hawaii. With you, Hawaii. With you, Hawaii. I need a summer breeze, some fresh air to put my mind at ease. No cares. You wanna come with me? Me and you go to our favorite tree. Are you ready now? We jump on a plane now. We're taking away. Yeah, we're taking away. Don't hesitate now. We're taking away. Yeah, we're taking away. We'll never come down. We're going away. Yeah, we're going away. You and me. Feeling the sun on my face in Hawaii.